we've still got, in the future, we're going to have people who've lived there all the 70 years, 80 years, 90 years in fluoridated communities. And there I think it's going to become more and more obvious that we're not just damaging the teeth of people, we're damaging the bones. But the other issue is, we could see dental fluorosis, but what about what you can't see? What about the baby? Now, let's go back again to the bottle-fed baby. That bottle-fed baby is getting 250 times more fluoride than nature intended. What's that fluoride doing to the developing brain, the endocrine system, the thyroid gland, the pineal gland, and so on? And we've really never looked, in the Western world, in the fluoridated countries, they really haven't done the studies. But we're beginning to find these studies being done now in India and China. There have now been 24 studies, 24, which show an association between moderate to high exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. And that's very, very disturbing. And the doses are not that much higher than some of our kids are getting today.
The IQ, that would, and then the argument here is then that this is having a neurological effect.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not talking about
150 animal studies. So it isn't just we are seeing lowered IQ. It's just we know that fluoride damages the brain. And always with these issues, because they use high doses in animal experiments, it's a question of, well, does your high-dose animal experiment give you a window into a low dose for human beings? So that's why the IQ studies are so important, because they are looking at much lower doses than we've used in animals.
We're talking about the case against fluoride in the water and that the impact on poorer kids. The reason that we can say that is that they are in certain economic groups, they are not going to be likely to use, say, bottled water, and that other people could use bottled water all the time. Do all bottled waters contain fluoride? Do some of them make sure they don't have it? I mean,
no, we don't know. We don't know. In America, the bottled water companies are not required to list the elemental composition as they are in Canada and Europe. If you go to Europe to get a bottle of water, they'll tell you what the level is, but not in America. We're flying blind on that.
Why?
So you need to contact the manufacturer to find out how much fluoride is in the bottled water.
Okay, but so some may be fluoride free, but they're not advertising that on their bottles.
No, but some would do the very opposite. They advertise that they've added fluoride to the water, nursery water. They are selling water in supermarkets deliberately to give the baby fluoridated water, which is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, really.
Because it's that first year which the kids are most vulnerable to dental fluorosis. But to go back to your low income for a moment, this is one of the emotive arguments used to promote fluoridation. We have to do this to help poor kids. This is the argument, poor kids, because they're not getting dental treatment, etc., and they can't afford the tooth treatment. And that's why I do it. It's very pernicious because, as you pointed out, Ian, it's precisely the low-income families that cannot afford avoidance measures, either using reverse osmosis distillation or buying bottled water on the one hand, and secondly, it's more likely that you're going to get poor nutrition in low-income families, and when you have poor nutrition, then fluoride is worse. Fluoride's toxicity is exacerbated if you have low calcium, low vitamins, low protein. And so, it's not only they can't avoid it with low-income families, but you're going to be more vulnerable. We already know, incidentally, from the Center of Disease Control, that black children and Mexican-American children in the United States have higher dental fluorosis rates. So they have higher rates of dental fluorosis, meaning that they're more vulnerable for a variety of reasons. One of them may be what I just said, poor nutrition, maybe. Another one is a higher incidence of lactose intolerance in black families. So for a variety of reasons, and these warnings are not being given. Nobody is warning parents of any families not to use bottled water, not to use tap water to make up baby formula.
All right.
Even if the concern was to end with dental fluorosis, which they admit, even if that was the only concern, they should be warning parents not to use tap water to make up formula, but they're not doing that because they are scared of threatening their precious fluoridation program.
Okay. Real quickly, then you mentioned the reverse osmosis processes. So are you talking about like a pure water system or one of the filters that you would put on a tap? Does it take the fluoride out?
Some do, but not the cheap ones. The typical carbon filters, the Brita filters and so on, they do not remove
They do
fluoride.
not remove it. All right. No. But we haven't talked about the cost.
Yes.
So about how much does it cost to add fluoride to the water supply, and how do they measure fluoride in the water supply? I mean, is there like a trickle that goes in? There's a certain place. Are some people getting more fluoride depending on where they are vis-a-vis the origin of the water system in a community versus other people who may be further away or not? So we'll find out how much is it costing, and is everybody getting the same amount of fluoride? The case against fluoride next on Coast to Coast. This is Ian Punnett. Connett, who's with St. Lawrence University, as well as the head of the Fluoride Action Network. The Case Against Fluoride is the name of the book, and we were talking about almost on any way you look at fluoride, you look at it in terms of if it's a medicine, then it's unethical to give people a medicine without them having a choice on it. If it's hazardous waste, it's unethical to give people something which is also used as a poison. It's unethical to give it to people if it affects different people in different socioeconomic groups differently. And then we get into the argument of what is the cost of adding fluoride to water? I mean, these are huge water systems. So who's paying for that and who benefits?
It's a huge cost, especially in big cities. It's costing New York City something like $7 or $8 million a year for just the chemicals, let alone when you have to repair the systems and change the delivery systems. So big cities, we're talking millions of dollars a year. Smaller towns, thousands of dollars a year. But even that, Ian, if you were using pharmaceutical-grade fluoride, if you were using the same kind of fluoride that's in dental products, you could not afford to do this. The only reason that whole big cities can use fluoride chemicals to do this fluoridation is they're using the hazardous waste largely produced by the phosphate fertilizer industry. The phosphate fertilizer, when you're making soluble phosphate, heats up phosphate rock with sulfuric acid. This releases two very toxic gases into the environment. For years, for about 100 years, these gases decimated the local vegetation, crippled cattle, etc., and eventually they were required to put wet scrubbers on, a spray of water. And that spray of water converted these gases into a solution called hexafluorosilicic acid, and it's that scrubbing liquor, untreated, which gets put into tanker trucks and shipped around the country and put into our water supply. They can't dump this into the sea by international law. It's too concentrated to dump locally, but if they can find somewhere to dilute this down 180,000 to 1, then they can get rid of it. And it's one of the idiosyncrasies of American hazardous waste regulations that if someone buys a hazardous product from you, it's no longer classified as hazardous waste. It becomes a product. So that's what's happening. And I have not made that up. It isn't Monty Python. This is absolutely what is happening. We are taking a hazardous waste from the phosphate fertilizer industry and dumping it into our drinking water the answer to pollution is dilution.
Okay. So say that for a water system as big as New York, $7 to $8 million, that's insignificant, though, financially. And I would imagine for, say, a smaller city, the 50th the size of New York, it's not that much money to add fluoride, right?
Not if you divide it by the population, and that's the way they get rid of, get people to accept any taxes. If you divide the total by the total number of population, it doesn't seem very much. But, when you're talking about something which is damaging your teeth, which is causing dental fluorosis and other problems, that's where the money is going to be in those unnecessary damage to our health.
Okay. But so then the trucks arrive, and just walk me through the fluoridation process. So the trucks arrive, and what is the fluoride delivery system like? What do they do? How do they get it, and how do they monitor the levels of fluoride that are going into the water supply? I understand, say, checking the pH balance of a pool in the backyard, but that water's not going anywhere. And you can walk around the pool and check it in 3 or 4 different places and get a real idea of, how much chlorine, for example, to add to a backyard pool. But how did they do that with fluoride in a fluid system like, where you're going to be running water down through pipes?
Yep. Well, the most of the communities which are fluoridating now use a liquid. They use hexafluorosilicic acid or silicon fluoride to the water. However, and they bleed that in. They drip it in.
They drip it into a pipe as the water is leaving the plant.
Yeah, but when you talk about how do you control the dose to people, that's where you get into one of the absurdities of this practice. Because whilst, the argument that you're getting to is how do you control the concentration in the water? But that's not the issue. The issue is how do we control the dose going to people? And the answer is you can't control the dose, because you can't control how much water people drink. And some people drink a huge amount of water. People that work outside in a hot climate, people that have diabetes and so on. So there's a huge range of dose that people are getting. And ask any pharmacist if there's any drug that you can give to people and say, take as much as you like. Is there any drug that you can give to everybody, whether they're very young, whether they're a baby, whether they're an infant, whether they're a child, whether they're elderly, whether they're sick, whether they have poor nutrition or good nutrition? No, it's absurd. It's a very bad medical practice. As you earlier indicated, Ian, you're depriving individuals of their informed consent. It's pernicious to families of low income because they can't afford avoidance measures. But the really crippling arguments against fluoridation is you can't control the dose, you can't control who gets it. It's a lousy medical practice, and there's no way around that. It's a lousy medical practice. Can't control the dose, can't control who gets the medicine.
I'm going to read some to you, and I'm going to encourage you to not go ballistic, but I just want you to hang on for a second. Let me get through it, okay?
Yep.
I mean, knowing what I know about your work, I anticipate your response. I'm reading this from the CDC's website on fluoridation, okay?
Yep.
Here's what it says. 2 published studies conducted by CDC reaffirmed the benefits of community water fluoridation. Together, the studies continue to show that widespread community water fluoridation prevents cavities and saves money, both for the families and the healthcare system. In fact, the economic analysis found that for larger communities of more than 20,000 people, where it costs about 50 cents per person to fluoridate the water, every dollar invested in this preventative measure yields approximately $38 in savings in dental treatment costs.